Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sarah Cott, SVP of Programming at The Hill. Thank you to everyone joining us online and in the room for our event, Science Over Stigma, Rethinking Nicotine Harm Reduction. I'd like to thank our sponsors, PMI US, for their support of this discussion. Despite decades of progress in tobacco control, nicotine and how it's consumed by adults still remains a question mark for many. What are the risks? Do they change based on how nicotine is delivered? Are smoke-free nicotine products better alternatives to continued smoking? Here in Washington, the question sounds more like this. Should the FDA modernize its role in regulating tobacco products? How can we better protect public health, especially for our youth and vulnerable communities? This morning, we'll try to answer all of these questions and more as we go over results of the latest U.S. Medical Professionals Survey and hear from lawmakers, public health experts, and consumer advocates on misperceptions, opportunities, and challenges of smoke-free products and what it will take to accelerate an end to smoking in America. Before we get underway, a few housekeeping rules. If you're here with us in the room, please put your phones on silent for the duration of the program, but please join the conversation on social media. You can follow us on Facebook, X, and Instagram at The Hill Events using the hashtag HillHealth.
Now, please welcome to the stage for this morning's sponsor segment, Pratika Kumar, Director at Philip Morris International, in conversation with Liz Martin, Account Executive at The Hill.
Welcome, Dr. Kumar. So glad to be with you today. I understand you're here to share top-line findings of a national survey with U.S. medical professionals. Can you please take us through the findings?
Yes, I'm happy to. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Pratika Kumar. I'm the Director of the U.S. Scientific Engagement Group at Philip Morris International, and I'm really pleased to share the top-line findings from a recent national survey of U.S. medical professionals. I was so excited that I woke up 3 times last night to check if it was 6 a.m. yet. So great. So this research really explores clinicians' understanding of tobacco and nicotine products. What are their risk perceptions of these products and how that translates into patient care? Now, these insights help us better understand the opportunities and barriers on the road to effective tobacco harm reduction. And by clinicians, I'm going to use medical professionals, clinicians, all interchangeably. And what I mean is physicians, nurses, social workers, people who work in direct patient care. So let me tell you a little bit about the study. If the clicker will work. Right? So this was really a comprehensive study. It was fielded and conducted by Pavado. It's a research firm based out of St. Louis, Missouri. And we went through an independent institutional review board approval for this study. And what it really does is it provides, makes sure that the respondents' privacy, integrity, data credibility, all of those things are maintained, and that we can publish the findings in a scientific journal. So if you see, we surveyed 1,565 healthcare professionals, and it was through a broad range of specialties, right from primary care physicians to general nurses, mental health nurses, pulmonologists, cardiologists, oncologists, but then we also wanted to broaden it and include mental health professionals. So we included psychiatrists, mental health nurses, and licensed clinical social workers who work in the space of addiction. And that is because smoking over-indexes in populations with mental illness. So just want to make sure that I have everything here. And yes, I did want to share this, that about 4 years ago, Rutgers published a similar study where they looked at the perceptions of physicians of tobacco nicotine products. Now, that sample was a smaller sample, and it only covered about 6 specialties. So we are happy that we were able to get a larger sample and bring in more diversity of voices in this study. Now, when physicians were asked about public health issues that the U.S. government should take action on, smoking and tobacco use really ranked very high, right after chronic diseases and mental health. So one thing I want to make sure that I share here is that smoking is not just a standalone risk. It is also a driver of many chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and cancer. Now, About 80%, and that explains why 80% of the healthcare professionals in this study said that addressing smoking and tobacco use should be a high priority for government action. So the message is clear that they want smoking and tobacco use to be front and center for the US government to take action on. And this is where I will, yes. I'm going to stand, and you can find out that I'm a recovering academic because, so this is where I said that, it is smoking and tobacco use should be a priority for the US government. I'm sorry, I forgot to hit the clicker. And this is where I want to show you that medical professionals, so the good news coming out of the study is that medical professionals do see a continuum of risk. So they consistently placed combusted cigarettes on the most harmful end of the spectrum, and they placed nicotine replacement therapies at the least harmful end of the spectrum. But what we really see is that while they did that, FDA, I should back up and say that FDA places all nicotine and tobacco products on a continuum of risk. So going from combustion, which is the most harmful, to no combustion, which is the least harmful. And if you see, this is the risk that comes from cigarettes, right here. And so what you see is that when one switches from use of combustible products to non-combustible products, that risk really drops. So it's no longer a straight line. It's not a continuum, it's a risk cliff, right? And this is where the gap is in the knowledge of professionals, because what we saw in the study, while they rated cigarettes as 9.7 on a 10-point scale, they rated heated tobacco products as an 8, which is not that much different, right? And so what we see is that there is a gap in their knowledge of knowing that there is a significant risk in non-combustible products. Now, this is the education gap that we must address so that physicians and nurses and healthcare professionals can address the needs of adults who smoke. Now, a deeper issue of confusion among healthcare professionals is how they see nicotine. Right? And so about 2/3 of the healthcare professionals in our study, they either incorrectly believe that nicotine on its own is a carcinogen, it causes cancer, or they're unsure. Now, this understanding presents a major barrier to harm reduction. And if providers are uncertain about nicotine's role in disease, it becomes nearly impossible for them to confidently counsel patients. So what we need to recognize here is that providers, who are the most trusted voices for patients, if they carry this misperception, how can we expect the public to have the right information? It was too fast. I was only given 8 minutes, so I'm going to show you the top line findings. Yes. So this really talks about what happens in practice. We saw that there is nicotine misperception. We saw that while there is an intellectual understanding of risk continuum, there is some confusion about where to place those products on that risk continuum. And that translates into practice because only 21% of the providers in the study said that they always talk about smoke-free products with the patients who smoke. So most of the providers are only sometimes having that conversation with their patients. So, and there was a slight increase among providers who see a higher volume of patients who smoke, but that was not a dramatic increase in any way. So this gap really shows that what providers know and what providers do, there are real-world consequences, right? So 93% of the providers said that if FDA deems a product as reduced risk, it has an obligation to share that information with the providers. And 95% of the providers said that if FDA shares that information with them, they are happy to share that with their patients. So they are looking to FDA for very clear, consistent concrete guidelines and through the formats that they prefer, right? So physicians work within very tight timelines, they have very limited bandwidth. As somebody who worked in a healthcare system myself, and I did this study on opioids in the health system, physicians don't really have the time to have the conversation unless they are given very clear and concrete guidelines. And then lastly, and I feel most importantly, physicians think that FDA needs a reform. They feel that the current framework is outdated and it needs to evolve to better regulate modern nicotine products. Now, this is important. Why? Because many of the smoke-free products that we were talking about earlier today on the risk continuum, they were not even on the market when FDA started regulating tobacco products in 2009. So the science has evolved, but the provider education, the public understanding, and the regulation all have lagged. So in the end, I feel that there are 5 truths that come out of this work, and I want to leave you with that. One is that uncertainty serves no one. It doesn't serve the providers, doesn't serve the public, and it certainly doesn't serve the 30 million adults who smoke in this country. Secondly, if clinicians don't get the message right, the public won't. Thirdly, that public health needs to evolve beyond this all or nothing or one-size-fits-all approach. Risk is not binary. It's not risky, risky or not risky. Risk exists on a continuum. And finally, if we really want to save lives, we have to expand the toolbox and support the providers in guiding patients to safer choices. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar, very much for sharing this with us, and we look forward to the rest of the program.
Thank you.
Thank you, PMI US, for sponsoring today's show. Now please welcome to the stage the moderator of today's program, Charisse Gomez, executive producer and host of Living Local DMV at DC News Now. She is joined by our first headlining guest, Dr. Tom Price, the 23rd Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services.
Well, Dr. Price, so excited to talk to you today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks. Great to be with you.
Well, you just heard some highlights on this study of U.S. Medical Professionals Survey. What are your immediate takeaways?
Well, thanks to PMI and thanks to the hosts and sponsors for this event, and thanks to all of you for coming out. I think it's important to set the foundation for this, and that is that cigarette smoking is a scourge, and that it is the largest preventable cause of death and disease in this country. 28 to 30 million smokers, 16 million folks have some kind of disease related to smoking. Mm-hmm. We spend about $250 billion a year taking care of those folks in this country. And yet we still lose almost 500,000 folks a year dying from some disease or cause related to smoking, including my own dad, who died at the age of 68 prematurely. Mm-hmm. So when you look at these statistics, this survey, which I think is incredibly helpful and incredibly important, you find a couple things. One is that the physicians, my fellow colleagues out there practicing medicine, they are clamoring for more information. Mm-hmm. I think in their heart they know that they haven't been brought up to speed on the kind of science that's out there right now, and these new products, as Pritika talked about. And they have said explicitly that if the FDA would actually give them the information, they would utilize it and let their patients know what this information was. So it's incredibly helpful, I think, the survey, and I'm so pleased that it was done. And we want to make certain, starting with this, to take this information and take it to the public and medical professionals.
So the updated science is there, and I think everyone can agree that we want regulation to catch up with the science.
Absolutely.
And you published in 2024 an op-ed declaring independence from smoking should be a policy priority. And in that you said that we need to take a realistic approach that embraces the truth about tobacco harm. What do you think that realistic approach looks like?
Well, when you saw the continuum of risk, cigarette smoking is horrendous. The combustibility, the burning of tobacco creates millions of byproducts, chemical byproducts that result in the disease and the challenge that people have when they smoke. My own dad passed away from emphysema. He started smoking in World War II when they were giving him cigarettes, and he smoked almost up until the day he died. But the challenge is that there are ways, and nicotine, it's the nicotine in the cigarettes that is addictive. So that's what keeps people smoking. They don't smoke because they want to get sick. They smoke because they enjoy it. Many people enjoy it. But nicotine is incredibly addictive. But nicotine by itself is not terribly harmful to your health. It's terribly addictive, and that's what keeps folks smoking. But it doesn't kill you. And that's the message that I think that regulators need to, they not just appreciate, which they do. The FDA has defined this continuum of risk and recognizes that smokeless tobacco, smoke-free tobacco consumption is much less risky. But we haven't penetrated that to where it needs to be from a regulatory standpoint and from an education standpoint. So when you see the statistics up here, I think that Pritika showed, the majority of health professionals in this country believe that nicotine is a carcinogen. Let me say that again. The majority of health professionals, including my physician colleagues, believe that nicotine is a carcinogen, and it isn't. And so if the doctors don't have the correct scientific information for whatever reason, and we can talk about what reasons that might be, but if the doctors don't have the right information, how can we expect them to convey to their patients the correct information? And then how can we expect patients to make the right decision? So the incentive for patients to move from combustible cigarettes, smoking cigarettes, to a smoke-free tobacco product is huge, but that message isn't out there.
And I want to take a deeper dive into that. What do you think the reasons are that information isn't out there? We live in the age that information is everywhere. Everyone has the World Wide Web in the palm of their hands, in their pockets right now.
Sure.
So what do you think the reasons are?
You know, it's a great question, and this survey, I think, highlights some of it, but part of it is the stigma. Right? So there's an education lack of, because if you smoke, you're foolish, right? I mean, that's the mantra. When nobody wants to smoke, so it's either all or none. It's this binary choice that was talked about on the previous panel. Well, that's not so, because there are so many things less harmful to one's health besides smoking that would satisfy this nicotine craving and addiction that many people have. So the message is, if you don't smoke, you ought not start. If you do smoke, you ought to quit. Now, sadly, that's kind of where it is stopped from an education standpoint in medical professionals and in most sectors of society. But the fact of the matter is that if you can't quit, and we know that about 25, 28 million individuals out there who want to quit can't, or are unable to do so, then you ought to change how you consume nicotine. You ought to change how you consume any tobacco product. How we get that to penetrate is through education of the public, education of medical professionals. The FDA itself, I'm enthused about the new acting director at CTP, because I think that there's an opportunity for somebody who understands the importance of regulation to actually move us in the right direction from an education and an adoption of smoke-free products that are out there. So I think we're on the cusp of something that can be very, very helpful from a health standpoint.
Absolutely. And I've seen, I know personally, a lot of advertisement or the media talking about alternatives. But the only thing I've seen personally has been that we need to keep it away from teens, but not necessarily how adults can access alternatives. So what are your thoughts on alternatives that give people access to nicotine, but not necessarily tobacco?
It is incredibly important, because, again, if you get folks to quit burning tobacco and inhaling it. Combustible.
Right.
Yeah. Then you can move in the direction of having them have a better health status and be able to satisfy that nicotine craving. So that education is absolutely paramount, and we've got to do it. I'm glad that you mentioned youth, because it's one of the the bugaboos out there that keeps us from moving, I think, in a good direction. The good news is that youth smoking and youth use of any other products is actually decreased. And so something's working out there in young people that is making it so that they are less likely to smoke and less likely to use any other product. The importance about these smoke-free products that I think is incredibly helpful, and that is, in addition to it decreasing the health risk for individuals, and that is that youth don't seem to be picking it up at all. It has no attraction for them. And so I think there's a great opportunity to, again, educate medical professionals, have the FDA recognize that they need, that it's their responsibility to regulate these products and to get them out there and to educate folks and move folks toward a better health style.
Very important. Now I'm going to ask you a big question that might take longer than the time we have today.
Why did the Braves lose last night?
Oh, you know what? And as a native Georgian in Atlanta, I think they played the Nationals, and I think they did lose.
Oh, thanks
actually.
for the memory. Yeah.
So, no, why'd you have to remind us? He's like, yep, indeed, they did lose, but they did win last week. I will say that.
That's right.
I wanted to know, during your time as the 23rd Secretary of Health, I want to ask currently, what are your concerns for healthcare in this country, and what you knew then? What do you know now? What did you wish you knew then?
Well, so many things. I think that apropos this topic, science ought to be dictating our policy. And sadly, from a health standpoint, science hasn't dictated policy in the area of tobacco consumption, especially with the smoke-free products and the heated tobacco products and the like. The good news is that there are thousands of people within HHS and within our health industry in the country, millions within the health industry in the country, who are dedicated to making certain that individuals have a healthier lifestyle. We need to listen to them. And that's, I think, where one of the challenges with FDA comes, because FDA has acknowledged this continuum of risk, that combustible cigarettes are the worst thing you can do, and then there's a risk, continuum risk, as you get moved down the stage of tobacco use. But that needs to be published. It needs to be driven home to the medical professionals so that the doctors can recommend to their patients an appropriate way to consume something that they're going to consume regardless. But they're harming themselves in major ways right now.
And I talked to you offline about Quit Smoking Georgia, something that my father was able to utilize in our great state of Georgia, even though the Nationals did beat us. And they have what is called the Georgia Tobacco Quit Hotline. Do you think we are missing something nationally, from a national standpoint, where people do not know about the alternatives and they have access to patches, gum, and nicotine alternatives?
Absolutely. There can be a public health service program, publication program. There can be encouragement by insurance companies to incentivize, from a financial standpoint, individuals that currently consume tobacco. That helps the individual, but it also helps the insurance company, because it's less likely that the individual is going to have a chronic disease if they consume something other than combustible cigarettes. So it's incredibly important for us to make certain, and states that have a Medicaid population, oftentimes that has a higher incidence of smoking than the general population. Imagine if every Medicaid program in this country actually incented individuals from a financial standpoint to participate in a smoke-free program process so that they get off cigarettes. How much more money could we save across this country? Many states right now, they tax these smoke-free products at the same rate as tobacco, which makes no sense at all. There's no financial incentive for somebody who's considering doing it. They say, well, shoot, it costs me just as much to buy a pack of cigarettes, and it's the devil I know compared to the devil I don't know, and why on earth should I switch? But if we make it an incentive from a health standpoint, we make it an incentive from an ease of use standpoint, and we make it an incentive from a financial standpoint, you've got a win-win-win, and we move folks in a better direction.
Well, I want to end this on a positive note, or a lighter note, and I want to ask you, what are you hopeful for with legislation surrounding tobacco products, legislation surrounding and regulation surrounding nicotine?
Well, I'm hopeful, and I mentioned the new CTP acting director, Brett Caldwell. Yeah. I'm hopeful that he will be able to move the FDA in a very positive direction as it relates to tobacco and nicotine, and recognize and publicize, and he's got the experience to be able to do that. From a state standpoint, I've had the privilege of going to different states around the country and talk to state legislators about the kinds of things that they can do to move us in a better direction from a state policy standpoint, both with their state health benefit programs as well as taxation of tobacco products, a lower taxation for smoke-free products. So there's so many things that can be done, and I am hopeful. I'm hopeful because of the interest of all of you in this room and the people that will hopefully see this. I'm positively hopeful because of the work that's being done. This survey work that has been done educates folks and lets them know kind of the foundation of where we ought to be when we're making decisions.
Well, hopefully your hope will extend to our Atlanta Braves and we get back to the World Series. Dr. Price, it was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for
your time.
God bless.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage former Congressman Larry Bouchon, a physician and now a senior policy advisor at Holland and Knight. He was vice chair of the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health during his time in Congress. Welcome.
Thank you.
Dr. Bouchon, so excited to talk to you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's hard to follow Secretary Price, though.
Who's your MLB team? We have to start with that.
The Chicago Cubs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I grew up in Illinois, so sorry about that.
We can't all be perfect. I'm sorry.
Dr. Price always used to say at the end of Republican conference when they adjourned, he'd also always say, "Go Braves."
That's why we love him. That's
Yes.
exactly why we love him. Well, thank you again for joining us today. I also want to start with the same question. What were your immediate takeaways from the survey?
Well, that we need to do more education, and also that it's pretty clear. Let me just say this on background. So I was a cardiovascular and thoracic surgeon. So heart surgery, lung surgery, I would say 95% of my patients, a lot of their disease was related to cigarette smoking. And so you would think that having open heart surgery would be the impetus for you to quit smoking, right? But I would say maybe 50% of the patients that I operated on actually quit even after they had open heart surgery. So the addictive nature of nicotine is the challenge. And so I think based on the survey, I think you see where even healthcare professionals aren't really, I don't think, well educated on the spectrum of risk, right? Where you have the most, as Dr. Price described, the most risk, and then there's a spectrum where you could potentially convert people who are probably going to use these products anyway to a less risky product that would benefit their health, right? And so that's kind of what I took out of that survey. And there's many other things, but that's the gist of it, I think.
Absolutely. And then as a surgeon, you mentioned 50% of your patients may quit, may not quit.
Yeah.
How many times did you see nicotine being the reason behind? It's the addictive nature, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
That's the cause.
Yeah.
Is there ever a time as a physician, as a surgeon, that you need to recommend nicotine alternatives or patches, gums?
Yeah, I mean, other than abstinence, right?
Right.
Saying, okay,
Right.
You need to quit smoking. You just had 4-vessel bypass, okay? You would think that would be a good thing, but the addictive nature of nicotine is such that it's very difficult to quit. So yes, then let's find some non-combustible alternatives here if you're going to use nicotine. And of course, when I quit practicing in 2010, so at that time it was primarily nicotine, the patches or the gum or those things now. But now you have the tobacco products that are the heated products, and those are starting to come. And in fact, I was in Italy on a trip last year, and I went to a facility that produced those for the European market. Unfortunately, because of regulatory process in the United States, most of those are not yet available to people here in the U.S. So, of course, other than not using these products at all, something less on the less risky spectrum of risk is something that I would promote.
Absolutely. And you spoke on a panel last year where you highlighted the need for clear public education, which we've talked about a lot today, to address the misconceptions about nicotine and delivery methods. From your standpoint, what are the misconceptions, the common misconceptions the public may not understand?
Well, first of all, it's a challenge because of the internet, right? Anybody can get on the internet and Google something, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I would highly recommend people go to respected sources, first of all, and not just, the random sources on the internet.
What are those respected sources?
Well, I mean, you would think it would be, government agencies, HHS, agencies that have recommendations out there, national medical societies, the American Lung Association, people like the trusted sources versus, the random
bloggers.
sources, the bloggers or whatever you might get. So that, first of all, that creates a baseline challenge, I think, in information. So I think, but it's striking that even, and Dr. Price mentioned this, even at the professional level, physicians really, I think, need a little more education about the risk spectrum and what to advise people on, because the reality is that, and I said this in my opening, is most people that smoke will continue to use nicotine products at some level. And so if you recognize that, then you have to be able to have the availability of non-combustible products that are way down on the risk spectrum, because you're fooling yourself if you think that people, like I said, at least half of the patients, because I used to document this when they'd come in for their first follow-up visit, and for a while, and then I looked at my own empiric information. I'm like, well, only half the people quit smoking. Many people smelled like cigarette smoke when they came in the room and their first hospital visit, their first visit after their surgery. So, I think that's the challenge. We need to use more respected sources, and we need to use scientific data. We need to use the factual data on this, and we need to get agencies like FDA to improve on their regulatory process that recognizes that there is a spectrum here.
So the need for more data and more education, I think we're going to hit home on that a lot today. And you spent time on the Energy and Commerce Committee.
Yeah.
How did that time shape your approach to tobacco products regulation?
Well, I mean, we think, it was, of course, we did all kinds of things in healthcare, and it's not just tobacco products. Of course, the FDA regulates all kinds of things, right? And the knowing from a member's perspective, the bureaucratic process of trying to get things through the regulatory process and the cost of that, right? Whether that's pharmaceuticals, whether that's tobacco products, and the cost of getting through the regulatory process and the many, many years sometimes that it takes is one of the things that as a member of Congress I kind of learned pretty quickly. The frustration of trying to help constituents, that want the availability of other products out there that they see, with the internet, people see, oh, in Europe, this is approved, that's not approved. How come we can't access this here? That's kind of what you learn. You kind of see. There's not one bullet point, but you kind of see the need for improvement in the regulatory process, and you want to base it on science, and you want to make sure that you aren't too quickly approving things that might actually cause harm. But that said, the process needs to be more smooth.
Absolutely. What do you think would need to happen for the FDA to update regulations outside of more education, more data?
Well, Dr. Price would know that better than me, but you have to have the right leadership, I think, to a certain extent, and you have to have a focus on it, right? I mean, in the time I was in Congress for 14 years, we tried to do things that would, and we did some, right? That improved the process with like 21st Century Cures Act and legislation like that, and you can look that up. You can Google that. But I think it takes leadership. It takes a focus, a national focus on the regulatory process. And there's so many other things, to focus on, right, at the federal level.
Yeah.
But it takes champions and leadership and real people who are really committed to reforming the process. And I think there are a lot of those people out there. But then, when you have transition in political leadership, sometimes their focus shifts, and then, you back up some. So that's what it really takes.
And I asked Dr. Price this as well. We see a concentration on keeping nicotine products, tobacco products out of the hands of minors and teens.
Laudable goal.
Yeah, absolutely. But do you think there is a lack of information, education to medical professionals about the options for nicotine alternatives to adults?
Well, yeah, of course there is. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think there's not a silver bullet here. There's not a right answer here. Right. Again, I think with the internet and social media, it's made it even more challenging. But if there's other reasons why, it's a more complicated than that. I mean, in our society today, we obviously live in a very more stressful society for a multitude of reasons than maybe some of our predecessors did, right? And so people who have stress-related issues, anxiety problems and stuff they look for products that may mitigate that some. And of course, nicotine products, people get addicted, but they also, there also is an effect that have that some people feels like it kind of smooths over the day, so to speak, right? And so if there's not good education out there, when you got people that are saying, oh, well, I know I shouldn't smoke, but, it just kind of calms my nerves, so to speak. Then if they have good education to know, okay, there's other products out there that aren't combustible products that are much lower on the risk scale, and if that's going to be my goal, and that I'm starting using these products for all kinds of reasons, then people have more information, then you'll get less people using combustible cigarette products, right? Which is, as Dr. Price outlined, causes not only medical harm, but it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to our healthcare system. I think there needs to be more education, so people, people that are going to look for these products anyway, to make sure they understand that there are less risky ways to, if you're going to get nicotine in the system and so-called calm your nerves. So it's just a very complicated problem. Both my parents smoked. My mom started smoking in the 8th grade. She smoked until, she's still alive, believe it or not, but she didn't quit smoking until she was in her 60s. And it wasn't because she realized the health aspects of it. You know what happened? Her hospital, she's a nurse, her hospital eliminated smoking in the hospital. And so she found herself in the wintertime going out to one of those little booths out that they set up like away from the hospital, this thing, and she found herself out there smoking a cigarette when it's like 20 degrees, and she's like, this is really stupid, and so she quit. I mean, it wasn't because of she's a nurse, the known health risk, that's the power of nicotine addiction, okay? And it took her many years to quit slowly. And it's addictive because it causes, it actually, it will, and I'm not, this won't be over people's heads, but you have so many receptors for nicotine in the brain, and as you start to get nicotine there, the receptors expand. You get more and more called upregulation of receptors. So you have all these receptors in your brain that want the nicotine, right? And if you're a non-smoker, there's some, but there's not. But if you're a smoker, there's a lot more. That's a kind of an oversimplification of what happens. So when you all of a sudden withdraw the nicotine, these receptors are all, they're clamoring for that, and it makes it very hard to quit. It's more addictive than many other illicit drugs. That are illegal. Yes. So. I mean, I think it's a very complicated problem. You have to look at not only trying to explain it medically why people shouldn't smoke combustible products, but look at the reasons why they chose to reach out to those products in the first place, right? And it's a complicated problem.
And maybe it's something we need to look at is stress factors and the reason.
Yeah, it's a multitude of things, right? It's not just, people just don't, I don't think, funny thing is, when my parents both smoked, but they told my brother and I, if we ever catch you, my dad said, if we ever catch you smoking, I'll kill you. Okay? And if you knew
That worked, I'm sure.
Actually, if you knew my dad, and you were a little kid, you kind of believed him. But my point is they understood the downside of that. My mom's a nurse, right? And but it was very difficult to quit. So you have to look at all of these factors. Why do people reach out to these products in the first place? And I think that's the challenge when it's teens, right? When it's kids now who have a lot of pressure on them, and with social media and other things, a lot of them are reaching out for these type of products because to so-called calm the nerves or whatever. And I think that's a challenge for all of us.
And also a status quo, because when our parents were smoking, it was because everyone else was smoking.
Yeah, I mean, remember, if you don't remember because you're too young, but I remember.
I'm moisturized. You don't know how old I am.
But I remember when Marcus Welby was on TV when I was a kid, right? The doctors literally were on TV smoking cigarettes. The physicians on shows like Marcus Welby and stuff, the physicians themselves, because that's just what everybody did, right?
That was the norm.
That was the norm.
Yeah.
I mean, and remember the Virginia Slims attitude, ads to try to get women to smoke cigarettes because it was cool, and they were these really long and thin cigarettes. You don't have that anymore, of course, but you still have these other challenges, right? It's not cool anymore, but it also now is perceived in many ways to help you with the stresses of everyday life in many people's cases, particularly with youth. Because my daughter just went through high school, and a lot of her friends vape behind their parents' back, and it's not because they don't smoke, but they're looking for that soothing of the nerves and making their life. So we need to have an understanding of what the risk profile of these things are. Combustible cigarettes, not good.
Right.
And if you don't have you don't have a process that can approve products that are way further down on the risk profile that are available to Americans, then people are going to smoke cigarettes.
Very important. Another question I'm going to ask you is pretty much a silver bullet question. If you can answer this, then we need to just knight you.
Yeah,
right
all
here.
right. Yeah.
But in your 14 years in Congress, that it's very hard to reach across the aisle and have bipartisan support.
Yeah.
But there's a few things that people can all rally behind if the education is there and if the knowledge is there. And what do you think it will take to have the bipartisan support behind updated FDA regulations and new products? Is it just what would sway your or pique your interest?
I think there's bipartisan support for this type of thing. I don't think risk mitigation for combustible cigarette smoking is something that is a partisan issue. There are challenges in different areas, though. Urban America, rural America, different ethnic groups do different things. But overall, you take all that in. It's an education process, and if you have, if you see this data and you see, well, even physicians don't know what to advise their patients, and the availability of non-combustible products that are less risky. That if you're going to acquire nicotine, here's products that are less risky. So I think I said this earlier. It's going to take focus and leadership to make that happen. And to a certain extent, I think, it says stigma on the screen. People are a little, I think, reluctant, legislators and regulators and stuff, to come out and say, well, here's a product, and we approve it. You should just not smoke combustible cigarettes. And they're a little, they're a little reluctant to say, well, we understand this is, this has nicotine in it. But we want this to be available to the public. I mean, there's a little bit, the stigma thing kind of, in my mind, people just don't want to stick their political neck out to jump on that train necessarily, in my experience, because they got so many other issues to deal with. I'm talking about members of Congress and stuff, but we have to be realistic. And as a physician, like I said, at least I did like my own little survey for about 5 years. How many people quit smoking after open heart surgery? And it was only about half the people right? So you have to be realistic and say, okay, half of those people, what can we do if they're going to use these products? What can we do to decrease their risk and the risk of developing not only heart disease, but then in the future cancer or other things? And also, what can we do for them if they're parents? If we can keep them off these products, then there's not an example set for the next generation where they don't have a dad that said he would don't ever smoke, right? Like my dad did, because
or threaten someone, or threaten you.
Yeah. I think that's the challenge. You have to find champions and leadership. People are willing to stick their neck out a little bit and say, okay, we have to address this. Mm-hmm. And then we need to get the process, at FDA and get the FDA and the leadership there to recognize that we need to do something about it. I actually went in Italy did I mention this before? I was in Italy and I went to a facility that produces, heated mm-hmm. tobacco products. Mm-hmm. And it's very impressive. In Europe, these things are available, but they're not here. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think it takes. It takes leadership, people willing to step out and say, and say, we understand these are tobacco products, but here's such a low risk profile that we really need to have this available for people who are going to smoke anyway, mm-hmm. otherwise. And if we do that, we can make some improvement. And again, we won't have bad examples of people in the household that could potentially transmit that to the next generation. And so over time, hopefully you'll get less and less cigarette smoking.
Well, Dr. Bhushan, I thank you for your leadership today in championing this cause, because I think the one thing that breaks stigmas is storytelling and telling your expertise and also your personal stories. So I believe everyone underneath the sound of our voices has been impacted by smoking, by tobacco, nicotine addiction, and also cancer. So thank you again for
You're welcome.
Thank
you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
It's such a pleasure.
It is now time for our panel discussion. Please welcome to the stage Michael Mandel, Vice President and Chief Economist at the Progressive Policy Institute, Dr. Brad Rodu, Professor of Medicine at the University of Louisville and Endowed Chair of Tobacco Harm Reduction Research at Brown Cancer Center, and Guy Bentley, Director of Consumer Freedom at Reason Foundation. Welcome all.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining me today. And you've listened to Dr. Price and Dr. Bhushan. I want to know your immediate takeaways, like I asked the previous gentleman, from the survey, and just quickly go over your individual expertise and why you're here today.
Well, I'll certainly start. I want to thank the Hill for giving me a short parole from the university, and I'm delighted to be here. My takeaway is that we already know this, and the two other national surveys that have been published in the peer-reviewed literature have also shown how poorly educated and misinformed American health professionals are. We published a paper back in 2009 showing that our own health faculty were not adequately educated about these issues. So it's very clear. The other thing that I was impressed by was the cliff drop-off, because there's no question it's been called a continuum, but in reality, from smoked tobacco to all smoke-free products, it's a cliff drop-off, and the risks are very, very low.
Thank you. So I'm an economist. I'm not a medical professional. Okay, I need to say that right up front, because I sort of feel like I'm on stage with people who have much more expertise in this area than I am. But I am an expert in innovation. And one of the essential features about innovation is that people are often scared of it, and they also don't have enough information. And there's a transmission lag between the scientific data and then what people actually think. And so when I read that survey, I sort of said, well, this kind of looks like what is often true for new beneficial innovations, that people don't actually understand them right away. And so it said to me that the process of education has to be intensified.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And one of the things I take away from the study is originally I've worked in and around public policy concerning tobacco and tobacco harm reduction for around 10 years now. And previously I was a journalist in the United Kingdom. And one of the things to see moving from the United Kingdom to here is the dramatic differences in education amongst medical professionals between the United Kingdom and the United States. The National Health Service, the Royal College of Physicians, Public Health England, King's College London, these are all major entities with trust from the British people, the British public and patients, and are all promoting the message that there are safer alternatives to cigarettes. If you can't quit cold turkey, you can embrace these new alternatives. And so I think what the study really highlights is that those accurate risk perceptions and so on need to be brought to the United States to bring the kind of innovation and relative risk knowledge in the UK to the United States, because medical professionals, these are the people patients trust the most. There's a lot of skepticism of institutions and public health bodies more broadly that's grown over the last few years. So having those one-to-one relationships between your healthcare provider giving you the information you trust can really make a difference in terms of how people improve their health.
Absolutely. And each one of you represents a different expertise and background. So with that being said, I would love to know your thoughts on the common misperceptions, misconceptions, and how that is impacting public health and the economy.
Well, when you look at this, the pattern, you have a lot of lives lost from cigarette smoking. You have a lot of economic losses, okay, to the tune of $600 billion a year from cigarette smoking. And so there's a mismatch between the benefits of the harm reduction products and then what the benefits, what people are sort of worried about in terms of risks. Now, like I said, this is often true for innovative products, okay, that people's worries and fears get in the way of adopting them. And so we're seeing a similar pattern right here, where we have these products which are clearly beneficial, which clearly can help move people from sort of high-risk activities towards lower-risk activities. And it's hard to make that case to people, okay, without support from the government, without a sort of a concerted educational effort. And this is not, it's not unusual for innovative products, but it's very important to kind of make this, to attach the benefits to the science, okay? And that often requires work because it requires drilling down on complicated studies, okay? And making connections that people are not used to making. But we have to do it in order to sort of move the economy and people's health forward.
Absolutely. And Dr. Rodu, this next question is for you. You've spent years and years on tobacco harm reduction. So in your studies and in recent years, what does the science really say about the risk of nicotine outside of addiction?
Well, I've 31 years to be exact. I've been publishing in this field, tobacco harm reduction. And when I first got into the field, we had a former president of the American Heart Association and an expert with hypertension. And so I went to her and I said, how do we sort out the difference in health risks between nicotine and smoking? And she said, it's very easy. There have been thousands of studies of nicotine, and none have shown a direct causal effect for any disease. Yet smoking, of course, is attributable to a lot of other diseases, both cardiovascular, respiratory, and cancers. So that's what took me down this pathway, that we must distinguish between nicotine and smoke. And it's very interesting. I saw a Nature article just last year, and the title was, "We Just Don't Know Yet About Nicotine," with 26,000 peer-reviewed articles in PubMed. We just don't know yet. So when we don't conflate nicotine and smoking together, we back up, a lot of folks back up and say, well, we're not sure yet, so we can't make that recommendation. I believe we can. and I've discussed this in detail, plug here, excuse me, advertisement, RODU, R-O-D-U, Tobacco Truth. Take a look. It's my blog, 700 entries from me from 2009 that talk about all of these issues.
Another trusted source, like we were talking about with Dr. Bouchon. So bloggers are trusted sources.
Absolutely, we are.
Absolutely, absolutely. Guy, I wanted to ask you, as your time being spent as a journalist in the UK, and we've talked a lot about Europe and how they differ with US regulations and thoughts and also innovation within the nicotine and tobacco world. What do you see as the main differentiation between UK regulation and US regulation when it comes to nicotine alternatives and tobacco alternatives?
Yeah, it's an excellent question because the differences are vast. So to give an example, in the United States, there are around 37 vaping products that have been authorized for sale, i.e. the FDA has reviewed their applications and said the benefits of these products outweigh what we think might be the potential risks. In the UK, there's 50,000 plus vaping products that are on Medicines Health Regulatory Agency's registry in that they can be legally sold. And the problem with the current system as we have it with FDA, the applications and so on, is that instead of being a path to innovation, as was originally envisaged in the Tobacco Control Act, to have new products come to market that can help people quit smoking, it's acted in reality far more as a bottleneck, really squeezing and tightening innovation. So only a very few products, often that are out of date and many people don't use, that people don't want to use. And predictably, whereas in the UK and other European countries where they do authorize products, we know what's in them, they are regulated. If problems emerge, we can take them off the market. What's happened in the United States is because we so strangled the sort of legal suppliers who are trying to play by the rules and get these products to consumers, inform consumers about their relative risks, is a huge black market has emerged now with vapes, particularly coming in from China, that we don't exactly understand what's in them. They could pose a public health risks. In all likelihood, they're probably still safer for you than combustible cigarettes, because cigarettes are so bad. But we've really ended up, I think, possibly unintentionally in an unfortunate situation where we have a very small category of products that are authorized, which mostly consumers aren't turning to. So if we open up, like the UK, like Germany, like France, like these other countries, New Zealand, Health Canada, and so on, we can make sure that consumers can get products they actually want and clamp down on the illicit market.
And this is open for everyone, and I've asked the last two gentlemen the same question. What do you see as the FDA's biggest challenge outside of a lack of updated data or research?
To shift to a pro-innovation stance in this area, okay? Because I agree with what you were saying, which is they've squeezed innovation. Government is very good at slowing innovation when it wants to, okay? And in many areas, the U.S. does better in terms of innovation than Europe does, okay, but not in this area. Not in terms of our attitude means that innovative products that could benefit people are not moving to market.
Very important. My next question for everyone is, what do you think the education and the messaging should start with? Should that be media? Should that be independent bloggers, researchers? I see you smiling. We still have love for our bloggers. We still have love for our bloggers.
And I give a hard endorse to Brad's blog, which I use relentlessly.
And we've seen a lot of people also depending upon social media for messaging. And we're seeing a lot of influence coming from social media influencers. So where do you think that messaging should start?
Well, it's interesting because we tried 3 times last year to have a medical education project for physicians. Medscape tried it with a grant from PMI, and they were attacked by anti-tobacco activists who used the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education, weaponized them so that they threatened Medscape with total obliteration of their program if they didn't pull that program. I was faculty, and we were firewalled from any influence by PMI, but we still had our program removed. So I said, okay, we won't do anything with PMI. I've never had support from PMI. I'll do it at the University of Louisville. The same weapon was used. Our program was up for 1 week. I had a 5-hour program all last summer. I developed this. I learned to video. I learned to edit. I did everything. I did the entire program, and it was up 1 week. And they used the same exact weapon to remove it. Now, in my case, they made completely vacuous, meritless claims that were absolutely false. But that didn't matter. The council still threatened the university with complete obliteration of their program. And I've described that in detail in my blog. So, I don't want to be a downer here, but we have significant challenges with a system that doesn't want to hear reasonable information about safer tobacco products.
What do you think that reasonable information, what vehicle would be best to put out that reasonable information? Should it come from the academia world? Should it come from another study that is sponsored by a PMI, if you will? What do you think that respected vehicle would be to get everyone on board?
Well, on the positive side, people are getting this information. We are seeing an unprecedented decline in cigarette sales in the United States. It's unbelievable. And they're adopting smoke-free products. So that's the good news, is that it is happening. And my focus has always been on educating everyone, not just doctors, not just regulators, legislators, but the public, because they will make a choice when they see advantages and they see their health improve. And so this, we needed to go viral and we needed to expand, but I see it developing just as I'm about ready to retire. Unbelievable. But
maybe it's not time to retire.
Exactly, get in the game.
Yeah.
I think
but we're certainly going to, we have very, very bright prospects.
I mean, I agree with Brad completely. And for instance, as well as FDA more clearly communicating what it has in academic journals, but the public don't engage with academic journals. It needs to be much clearer on this point. But we do have a new Surgeon General coming in. I think, for instance, a new Surgeon General's report focusing on the relative risks of nicotine would be an incredibly important source of information. It was the original Surgeon General's report in the 1960s that warned us about the dangers of smoking. So a really authoritative source, such as the Surgeon General's office and others, could help that go viral, start that conversation with the media, and then filter out to the rest of the country.
And Guy, this is an educated audience. Okay? Okay.
Are you sure?
And, no, you are. And our FDA Commissioner Makari has already described exactly what we've been talking about here. It's a blind spot. And he described in his chapters how these blind spots were ultimately recovered and the right thing happened, and that's what's going to happen here. And I'm especially encouraged. I read his book 2 weeks before he was nominated, so that I'm especially encouraged that he will bring that type of thinking to this problem ultimately, and will make a lot more progress.
A lot more progress indeed. Michael, my next question is for you. You study innovation, and we've talked about the economic impact. But tell me, which role should economics and social equity play in tobacco harm reduction?
Well, I think that that knowing what the economic impact is helps sort of frame the question. But I'm also sort of thinking about people's attitude towards scientific studies. All right, and we as a culture have, for economic reasons, if nothing else, have to learn how to take science seriously across a whole range of different areas. And this is not a left thing or a right thing, but it's an everyone thing. What people do is they sort of pick and choose the studies that they like. Okay, and we sort of have to move towards taking science seriously, because that's the way that we as an economy are going to move forward.
And you mentioned a very important part, that a lot of people they do not trust sometimes the science. Sometimes people are concerned about the science. What would it take to get the masses on the left wing and right wing to trust the science? Would it take any type of proof, studies? Again,
I think we sort of have to engage in discussions about what the studies mean. Okay, so the people understand. I mean, you say you can't have people reading the academic studies, but you can have trusted intermediaries. Right. Okay, digging into them, and so that they can get a sense about which of them are reliable and which of them aren't. And this is, I mean, when I sort of look at this area, and the harm reduction studies, you sort of say people on the left are rejecting. I mean, activists are rejecting them, and then on the other side, people are rejecting studies as well. Okay, and this is not helping anybody. It's not helping the economy move forward. It's not helping growth. It's not helping people's living standards. It's not helping people's health. Okay, and we need to sort of make this an important priority culturally.
Absolutely. I saw you had a follow-up.
I had a quick one about studies. One word: replication. Dr. Bhattacharya, our new NIH director, has called for additional NIH support for replications. And the reason I'm so interested in this is we have replicated a number of very bad epidemiologic studies about e-cigarettes. It's in my blog, excuse me, in my blog. And we have shown that these studies are poorly performed and in some cases fraudulent. We need that for all scientific studies, to have open data and replication.
Very important. I would be remiss if I did not give each one of you opportunity. I truly believe that the people perish for a lack of knowledge. And in that sense, I would like for each of you to go one by one and say how people can follow you, follow your work, follow your expertise, your blog, and your studies, because I think if we stay engaged and we're listening to professionals and experts like yourselves, we learn more each and every day that will help us in the long run. So,
go ahead. Do you want to start with me?
Sure.
I blog. I'm on Twitter. I try to be accessible, and I'll start today. Anybody wants to stay? My next appointment's at 4. I'll talk all afternoon with you. But the other thing is, I wanted to make a comment, and I'll do it briefly, about the youth, because that's come up over and over here. Well, it's interesting, because youth are smoking at the lowest rate in decades. Number 2, young adults are smoking at very low rates. They picked up vaping, but smoking rates are very, very low. I'm going to be dead and gone, but in 30 years, when that cohort ages, they're not going to have these smoking-related diseases. So that's why I'm super optimistic. Now, the other thing about youth is, it seems like everybody's blaming tobacco companies, FDA. Everybody has to do something. Okay, I'm going to put some perspective here. Do you know how many youth have been using alcohol? About 25, 30, up to 50% 20 or 25 years ago. Marijuana. It's been a quarter of youth using marijuana for the past 30 years, and marijuana up till a few years ago has never been legal. They're driving after drinking. They're not using seat belts. They are not using condoms, and they're being very sexually active. Our children do lots of risky things. And when you put this in perspective using nicotine, it's kind of like, well, they're doing a couple caffeine drinks. It's not clear that we have the right perspective for really addressing youth risky behaviors. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, if people want to follow our work at Progressive Policy Institute, you can go to progressivepolicy.org, and we cover a whole range of different areas, not just harm reduction, but growth, innovation, education, many other areas.
People can follow me on X at the very imaginative handle of @GBentley1. And they can also follow my work on this issue and others at reason.org, particularly, I think, the public policy work, which, we've been talking about education of medical professionals and so on. Also, we brought up legislators, critically important, and Dr. Price was talking about taxes. We have legislation moving through states to put taxes on the safer alternatives higher than combustible cigarettes. So the education, this lack of education has real world policy outcomes that hopefully we can correct in the near future.
I think the Twitter name is great. So, gentlemen, it has been a pleasure to talk with each one of you. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise with everyone today.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
For our final interview of the program, The Hill's healthcare reporter Joseph Choi sat down yesterday with Democratic Congressman Don Davis of North Carolina, the co-chair of the Congressional Tobacco Harm Reduction Caucus. Take a listen.
Hi, Congressman. So today we've heard from several doctors and PhDs today about this topic of tobacco and harm reduction, but none of them have actually worked in a tobacco field like you have early on in your life. Can you tell us about your experience in that and how that informs your job as well as being co-chair of the Tobacco Harm Reduction Caucus?
Growing up in Eastern North Carolina, cropping tobacco was just a way of life. We didn't think anything of it. We woke up early in the mornings, got on the back of a pickup truck, and we head out to the tobacco field. But it was very much a part of our heritage. Not only that, it helped us to make ends meet, to help the family. And it was something that most of the young people around the community, around Eastern North Carolina, participated in and did. And, to this day, I still believe, taught me so much about hard work. But more importantly, to go from the tobacco field of Eastern North Carolina to the halls of Congress, and now to be able to engage. The first congressional district of Eastern North Carolina has the largest tobacco census. We have more tobacco proportionally than any other congressional district. And it's something, therefore, that I take pride in. And more importantly, realize the responsibility that we have to engage in policy, these discussions that are important, not only to the people of Eastern North Carolina, but people across the nation.
As you mentioned, it provided a way of life for the people in your district, in your state. How do you balance the priorities of harm reduction along with the economic realities of a state like North Carolina?
When we think about the balance, we have to start by understanding, I don't know that there's necessarily a competition here, so to speak, and I believe you can strive to increase health outcomes as well as embrace the economic impact. And for instance, as we have seen the shift with our economy in Eastern North Carolina, we are one of the more economically distressed areas, not only in the state of North Carolina, but the country. So we have to continue to make sure our doors are open for business, that farms can continue to operate. At the same time, we have one of the most health disparity, some of the highest health disparities in the state and in the nation. So we also have to give attention to healthcare outcomes. And I believe we have really worked hard to do both. But not only that, I believe when you are able to look at a transition that we could make in the economy, I think it's imperative that we look at alternatives. And I believe smokeless products become an alternative, especially as we can continue to expedite the process and see more of that done right here in America.
And as we mentioned earlier, you are a co-founder of the Tobacco Harm Reduction Caucus. You co-founded alongside Representative Guy Reschenthaler. Can you tell us about what the caucus's aims are and what it's currently done in the past year? It was founded in 2024. Can you tell us more about your caucus?
Absolutely. The caucus is growing. We are about 16 members now, and I'm honored to be co-chair. We're looking at ways to continue to promote smokeless products, moving towards reducing harm that comes from tobacco, um, and doing everything we can to continue to strike this balance, so to speak. And I'm extremely pleased to be a part of this caucus and all of the great work that we're already doing.
Do you feel like your colleagues in Congress are catching on to this, uh, the aim of your caucus?
I believe there's a lot of work that's involved, and we have to continue to keep up the good work. And as we continue that work, we will continue to expand that level of awareness. But hey, there's still a lot of work that we must do that's ahead of us here.
Now, in recent months, uh, there have been layoffs at offices in the CDC and the FDA, essentially gutting offices dedicated to tobacco harm reduction or reducing the uptake. What role do you see agencies having, and what do you make of these staffing reductions?
What I think is most important here, we have to stay focused, keep our eyes on the prize, and that focus is how do we continue to streamline the process? We have to get to products that can be helpful. We have to make sure that we're taking every step to guard against counterfeit products that are out there that can be very dangerous and get to a place where we're able to not only provide smokeless products here in America, but realizing too that that's going to help strengthen our economy. That's the key here. That's the part of this whole conversation. And I know that, especially in places like Eastern North Carolina, rural America, it'll make a difference, a huge difference.
What policies would you like to see, really championed at the federal level when it comes to, the priorities of your caucus? You mentioned uh, combating counterfeits. We know that a lot of products are coming in from overseas that are geared towards young people. What policies are you looking at specifically?
Yeah, we have to continue to take a strong stance against counterfeits. We have to look at efforts to streamline processes. We have to continue to educate the public, not just the members, but the general public. We have to, in my opinion, to take steps that are going to help us further understand. For instance, when we look at the disproportionate level of smoking that's taking place in our ranks in our military, as an Air Force veteran, um, it's so important to me that we're taking the steps to understand what's taking place within the ranks with our military families. That's why we're leading the effort, a pilot program, to get out there to study, to see how we can better integrate smokeless products and just help our military families. And as we learn, we're able to grow from all of this. So there's a multitude of steps that should be taken that I believe we have an obligation to take here on behalf of the American people.
And when we talk about smokeless products, is it your hope that promoting smokeless products is a step towards cessation of tobacco use?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And you also touched on, you're a veteran. We know that tobacco use, the harms it disproportionately impact veterans, communities of color. Can you touch on your concerns surrounding that disproportionate impact we see?
Obviously, we have those members who are waking up every single day and putting on their uniforms, going to work for our country. But again, when you look, we have about 20 million Americans who are still smoking. We have within the ranks, 1 in 4, disproportionately, there's a much higher impact that's taking place. I believe we need to take the steps to understand what's going on there. And at the end of the day, this is about preserving our national security and making sure that those who are putting on the uniform every single day, not only that they serve our country, but even after their service, that they're able to go on and live healthy lives with their family members in life after their military service. So this is important to me. We owe it to those who are out there every single day fighting for our country to fight for them to still be able to have access and a pathway towards a healthy life.
Have you coordinated or spoke with the tobacco industry as you're looking towards advancing harm reduction from tobacco use? And if so, what have the conversations been like with them?
I put it this way, there are ongoing conversations. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with the industry, but I can definitely tell you that we're engaged knee deep in this work. That's why it is important for us to be here. That's why it is important for us to come together in the room, have these conversations, sometimes tough conversations, so that we can walk out stronger. And when we walk out stronger, we're going to walk out in a way in which we're able to address better health outcomes as well as wellness outcomes. It's not just physical health, but it's economic wellness that is also very much a part of this conversation. And to me, that's what's been most important in this discourse.
Have you been able to speak with Health and Human Service Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. about this or his department regarding your efforts?
I look forward to that conversation and definitely welcome the conversation with the secretary.
You mentioned public education efforts. I think those have decreased in recent years. What would you like to see on the public education front when it comes to tobacco use and harm reduction?
I believe we need to continue to share and convey the impact that obviously smoke-based products are having. I think of my grandmother, for instance. My grandmother, growing up in Eastern North Carolina, again, this was just a way of our life, smoked for decades, probably close to 70 years of her life. But she got to a point in time through education, she understood that she had to cut back. And I believe that she would tell you that, that was some of the best information, best advice she had received. And at that point in life, she was able to eventually take the steps to go on a pathway in which she eventually was able to transition from smoking. And I really believe it extended her life. God rest her soul now. But I'm sure there's no replacement to those years that she had because she had information that allowed her to now begin to transition and to make those steps necessary. So again, it's just information. Information is powerful. Information is key, and we have to do everything we can to get it out there. And when we do so, I believe that the facts are going to stand for themselves, that as we move from a smoke-based to smokeless products, that is indeed a pathway, a viable pathway that we can't write off, that's going to reduce in terms of the harm that's caused from tobacco across this country. And it's a meaningful step that we need to take, a gigantic step that we need to take for the American people.
Right. Thank you, Congressman.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you. And thanks for all those in attendance today.
That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks to all of our wonderful speakers this morning. On behalf of The Hill and our sponsor, PMI US, we'd like to thank everyone who joined us here today in person and those of you who tuned in online. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.